Well, here I am swiftly back with another video. I've just made this knife, which if you haven't watched the previous video, I'll put the card up in the corner. Maybe worth if you're interested to follow this from the beginning. So I've made that, and now I'm going to make a sheath for it. As I say, this video has come out quite quickly after the other one. We're reaching the end of the Christmas break now. The children are going to be staggered going back to school. There's a chance for a bit of homeschooling, so I just wanted to get this done before I have to knuckle down to the family commitments. But here we go. I'm obviously going to make the sheath out of leather. I've got loads and loads of different components for the build. Probably not worth listing them. It'll just take absolutely ages, but I'll just talk about them as I go on. One of the things I'm going to do is make the sheath, but I'm also going to make it with a dangler. And a dangler is where you don't actually need to thread the sheath of the knife through your belt. You can make something with a piece of leather like this with a D-ring there. I'm obviously going to trim this to shape, and you can have that hanging from your belt, and then you can clip on and off your knife loop, and I prefer that rather than having to take my belt on and off to get my knife hanging from me. So yeah, I'll have a go at making that. I've got a nice piece of veg tan leather here. It's about 3.5 mils thick, so it's good thick stuff. I'm obviously going to have to dye this in the process, and as I said, I'll take you through all the other bits that I've got. So let's get on with it. The first thing I'm going to do is make a template, so I've got something to lay on the piece of leather so I can cut out the shape of the sheath. I've got a piece of card here which I've folded in half, and one thing to be aware of is when you're making a template out of card, obviously it's considerably thinner than my piece of leather, and so you have to take account for the fact that when this is rolled over into shape, that there's going to be a bit of reduction in size as you roll the leather. So I'm going to allow the thickness of the leather from the fold here as my guide to start the actual size of the template, and that's about 4 mils. So I'm going to make a line about 3.5 to 4 mils from this fold. And there we are. So I've got my line drawn up towards the fold, about a 4mm distance there. I'm now going to lay the knife on and move it up so it just reaches the line that I've drawn along the top of the knife. I'm then going to just draw around the blade . So now I've got the basic outline of the sheath done. I need to now make an outline for what's called the welt, which is the spacing bit of leather that you put between the two pieces when you fold it over, and that's to stop the knife cutting the stitching and also to get a bit of space for the blade to slide down. So this needs to be, to follow the outside of the sheath here, it needs to be about 10 mils away from the outline that I've originally drawn. So I'm just going to measure 10 mils at various intervals. Oh, that's not a bad little guess. I'm going to give myself that one. And the next thing to do is to cut that out. And obviously once it's cut out, there'll be the correct symmetry as I folded the card. And there we have my template. Nice little space in there for the thickness of the leather, bit of symmetry, and yeah, I'm just now going to transfer this onto my piece of leather. So here we are, it's on my piece of leather now. What I mustn't forget is that I've got to allow on this side enough for the loop to come off. So because I'm right-handed, I'm going to have this knife on the right hand, on my right hand side on my hip, and so I need my loop to be on this part, the inner part of leather, so I'll put a little L on there just to remind myself that when I get to this point I need to come out quite far actually for a loop that I'm going to fold back down. Cutting out. So I've cut out the template here, a couple of tiny little ragged edges. I'm not at all bothered about that though, because the next thing I'm going to do is, well, I'm going to get my bit for the dangler measured out, but I'm going to burnish these edges and take off all the little frayed bits prior to dyeing both bits of leather, because I don't want them to be this colour obviously, and I've got some either dark brown leather dye I'm going to use here or a different type of dark brown. I'm going to test them both on another piece of leather to see which shade I like the best. And just on a bit of the scrap I'm going to put my template back on again and mark out this welt, because I've got to cut out a little bit to use as the spacer. I'm just going to use an awl here to make dots. Along the inside here, which I'll join up when I take the template off. That'll show me where to connect up my line. There we go, I'll join the dots. So I've now got the welt cut out, which I'll glue into there. Like that. Fits nicely. Then that folds over. I'm not going to fold it over whilst the leather's dry like this. I'm going to put some water on here when I do the final fold, because I don't want to crease it. Now I'll get to neatening up the edges and some dyeing. God, I really love working with leather. I'm very inexperienced. I've done one project where I made a blade protector for an axe for my brother. In my early stages of YouTube, I'll put a card up there and you can have a laugh at me. But what I'm going to do now is just use this edging tool to take effectively these sharper edges off the leather. And then at a later stage, after I've dyed it, I'm going to burnish, which means I'll put some cream on here and use a burnishing tool to smooth it all off. But that will be after I've glued this welt in place as well. As welt. First, this is the dangler. And on the folded inside, I'm obviously going to do the whole of the loop here, because that's on show. But I'm just going to come down an inch or so, a couple of inches on here. And actually I made a mistake there, but I want to avoid where the welt is going to be glued as well. I don't think that makes much difference. Well, they're both dyed now, and we're going to move them into the house so that you can dry a little bit quicker. And once they're dry, I'm going to remember to create this belt loop, not the belt loop, but the loop that goes on the dangler, and sew that into place before I glue in the welt and fold this over and glue the sheath together. Because once I've glued it together, there's no way I can access this again to sew, so it's important to do it in that order. Just before I leave this to dry, actually, I've marked out where I want my dangler loop to attach to the main part of the sheath, and I've curve that off with just using a 10p piece here and a pencil. So I'm just going to chop that off now and dye the end of it, and then I'll leave it all to dry. Right, so the dye's had a couple of hours of drying time, but the leather's still a little bit supple, which is good. And I'm now going to make the Dangler Loop. I should maybe have left a patch clear of the dye here so that the leather glue captures it a bit better, but I'm just going to roughen it up with a little blade here. So I'm going to put a little bit of water where it's going to bend here, just so that I don't get too much creasing, and then I'll stick it down. So I've roughened that up there and also on the facing surface, and I'll glue these together. And I'll just leave that now for an hour or so to set, and I'll stitch it up. Okay, well, this has had a little time to set now, so those nuts nice and firm. I've got some pricking irons here that I'm going to use just to get a nice pattern for the stitching. It's 5mm spacing. It actually doesn't need stitching, but I think it adds a nice little touch to the look of the sheath. Well, I've actually re-glued that loop back on now, but I have got the holes ready for the stitching, so I'm just going to let that set now for a couple of hours. But in the meantime, I can get on with this dangler. The dye is now dried on it. I'm going to burnish the edges, get them nice and smooth, and then fold it up and rivet it into place. I've got some of this Tokonoli cream, which cost an arm and a leg, but it goes a long way. Right, now I've got my burnishing tool here. I'm just going to use this. I do like this, it gets the edge really nice and rounded off and hardens it as well. I've got a little mini anvil here, and this tool, and one part of it here has got a hole that I can put over the washer, as it were, and then bang down on it, and then this bit domes it off nice and smooth afterwards. I just realised I need to go all the way through. Well, I can. Oh, it's great you having this journey with me, because I've made the mistake as I go on. I do want to go all the way through and have the stoppers on there, but I can, yeah, I can drill further and then put 2 more washers on. God. Oh well, here we go. Right, I'll drill 2 more holes. Right, so now I've gone through all 3 layers. I'm going to put a couple of new rivets in. Yeah, it's a bit neater. I'm just going to nip off about a millimetre, a couple of millimetres off top of these, so I can then dome them over nicely. Pop this in here. There we go. I'll polish that up, but we have on Dangler. Great, that'll just go on my belt. And I can pop off the knife. I can't decide whether I'll have it which way around. I'll have it probably like that actually. So if I feed it in like this, and there we are. Good. Pleased with that. I'll polish it up. Maybe when I polish the sheath. In the very small amount of leather stitching that I've done using the saddle stitch, I've really enjoyed the pattern, but I've often thought it'd be nice to have a bit of a contrasting colour of stitch. So I've got my that's a basic colour of my sheath, and I've just got this slightly lighter, quite thick waxed thread. So I'm hoping that that will make quite a nice effect, and I can use it on this little Dangler Loop just to try it out, because that's not so much on show, and then if I like it I can use it for the rest of the stitching down the sheath. So it's good to have a little sort of experimental bit to play with the loop, and then we'll get to gluing and folding up the sheath. I'd like to get one of those little leather vices, I can't remember what they're called again, that you sort of put between your legs whilst you're sewing. No, name escapes me. Maybe put it down in the comments if someone remembers the name of it. But this will do me for now. Great. Right, well all the way around now. I'm just going to go back a stitch. So what I'm going to do now is just chop off these two ends. There's only one knife that's worthy of chopping these off. Wow. Well, the next bit, and as far as I can go this evening, this afternoon, is to glue in the welt, and you can see that I've scored all along this shiny part of the leather. That bit doesn't need it, obviously, because it's already rough enough. But I'm going to glue the welt in, and then I'm going to wet the central spine of the sheath here. Wet it quite a lot, and then I'm going to fold it over and glue it, and then clamp it and leave it overnight to set. Trouble is with this leather glue, it's fantastic, but crikey, it sets fast. And without getting any water on my glued bit, I just want to soak that middle bit there. Well, we're on to day 2. It's coming along quite nicely, actually. I've just had a look at a bit of the footage, and I don't think I very clearly showed what I did with folding the knife over and clamping it. It was a little bit stressful because the tiny little clamps that I got actually weren't strong enough. So I disappeared from the camera whilst I still had it held in the right position, and yeah, it just probably wasn't very clear to you. But what I've just done is I'll show you now. I folded the knife over, and I'd put various very strong types of clips holding it all together. what else to do? Yes, I've got little leather, spare bits of leather here, there and everywhere so that I don't mark the actual sheath itself. But it's had, good 12 hours now, so it's time to take the clamps off and see how it's looking. And there we have it so far. The more observant people will notice that I've actually decided, just as I was cutting it out, that I was going to turn it into a lefty, so it sits on the left-hand side of me. I gave that quite a bit of thought, and the reason was behind, I had my Barco saw usually on my right side in my pocket, and I tend to put the bulk of my stuff in the pockets of my sort of trousers that I use for bushcraft, the Fjallravens, and I think this would be more appropriate on the left. If it isn't, then I've got the template and I'll just make another one. But when I'm in camp anyway, I just plan to take it off the dangler anyway. So it's looking pretty nice so far with the dangler. And yeah, that's come out quite evenly. I can still feel, you know, it's a little bit rough here and there, so I'm just going to hand sand this down now so all these bits are level, and I'll need to obviously re-dye these edges because once I'm sanding it should make it a little bit paler, but then we'll do some stitching. Yeah, that's coming out quite nicely. Great, so I'm pleased with that. I just used this coarse one and then on with the slightly higher grit. You'll notice, you can see that, yeah, that I made sure that my welt doesn't go all the way to the very end. And that's because if you ever put the knife back in the sheath and then things slightly wet, there's got to be some means of draining, otherwise it all will just gather and never come out. I very much doubt I will use this knife in the wet anyway. I very much doubt it'll see the light of day outdoors. It's so precious. But there we go. So I'm going to re-burnish, well, not burnish, yes, I'm going to use the edging tool again to smooth off these edges, because obviously having sand, it's made them a little sharper again. And then I'm going to re-dye this paler bit and then re-burnish it again. Now this is the bit that worries me the most. Well, it doesn't worry me, but it's the bit that if you make a mistake, you really can't cover it up, because I'm going to make a groove for the stitching so the stitching doesn't stay proud and therefore get damaged. And I'm going to use this grooving tool here, but first of all I thought I'd just get the gap that I want. You've got a guide here and the actual cutting part. I want to work out what seems like a decent distance from the edge. So if I do a little bit there and put it on my knife, I think that's a good distance. And so I'm going to work my way from here downwards. The guide will help follow the contour of the knife, and there ain't no turning back. Whew. Right, so there we go, all ready for stitching. So there we are. I'm just going to use my awl now to make sure I go all the way through, and then on with the stitching. Just like on the Dangler, I'm just using a saddle stitch. And there we have it all stitched up. Not too bad. Well, I'm pretty pleased with this. I've got quite a nice stitching pattern going along. And now the next thing to do is I'm going to soak it for about 20 minutes whilst I coat my blade in a little bit of WD-40, and then I'm going to cling film wrap the blade and the handle partially, because what I want to do is wet form so that the actual handle of the knife will stretch this leather a bit and make a perfect fit. Well, I said I was most nervous about doing that groove for the stitching, and that's actually not strictly true, because now it's time to see if the knife actually will fit in the sheath. I've covered it with, I've first coated the blade with a bit of WD-40, now I've covered the whole thing in cling film, just to give it a bit of protection. It shouldn't, certainly I don't want the handle getting too wet. The blade should be alright because it's stainless, but here we go. There's the sheath, and let's see how we do. I want it to be a pretty tight fit. That's working all right. Oh, that's exactly where I want the handle to go, about halfway up. And I think that's going to work okay. Excellent. Hooray! So what I need to do now is leave that for, I think, about 24 hours. I want to get it perfectly dry and formed around the handle, and then I'll take the handle out, take the whole knife out. Hopefully that just won't be the handle, leave the blade inside. And then I will treat in fact I'll burnish the bit that I've waxed in sanding, and then give the whole thing a bit of wax, and then with a finish with carnauba cream, and that should bring it up to a really nice shine. But yeah, we're doing okay at the moment. Well, welcome back. It's about a day later since I put the knife in the wet sheath for a bit of wet forming, and now it's time to see if the knife will actually come out and then maybe go back in again. It's dried nicely, I'll show you in a second, and I'm going to get on with the very last stages of it, but I'm pretty excited. I think it's going to be okay. As you can see, it's formed quite nicely, the leather around the knife. I'm going to try and bring it out without cutting myself. Quite a squeeze, but there's a lot of cling film on there. And there we have it. Let's make that and the dangler look extra special. So here's the sheath and the dangler. First thing I want to do is I sanded this sheath here to get it nice and level with the welt that's in there, and now I'm going to put some of this Tokonori cream on and burnish this, and also get this edge a little bit better. And go around it all, harden it up, and then the next thing will be the polishing. Well, it really does come up nicely, as you can see there. Absolutely solid, nice and smooth, no bits that catch at all. Well, first of all, I'm going to just treat both of them with this G-Wax, which is I use for my walking boots actually, but I'm going to use the hairdryer afterwards to just heat it up a little bit so it soaks in. Then after that, I'm going to use this Carnauba cream to finish it off, which will give it a bit more protection and also bring it up to a really good shine. Just plug the freezer back in, else Mrs. Outdoors will have a word. And there we have it. One nice sheath, one dangler, and I'm really pleased with the way it's come out. There seem to be some kind of creases in the leather which I was worried about at first, but I think it really adds nicely to the effect. I really like the way this seam with the welt has gone rock solid and come up nicely on a shine as well. One thing left to do, obviously, get this knife unwrapped and tried out. Well, I've obviously put the knife in the sheath with the cling film on for the wet forming, but I assure you, I've just taken off the cling film now. I haven't tried the knife in the sheath because I just want you to be with me for this moment. You just have to take my word for it, but I haven't. So I've got my sheath. I've got my knife, and here we go. Oh, listen to that. It went in with a click, and that's good firm grip. Once more. That's brilliant. Put the dangler on. And there we have it. That's really good. Well, you can probably tell I'm pleased as punch with that. I don't know. It even makes me feel a bit emotional. Sorry, it's ridiculous. It's a knife and it's a sheath, but just the fact that I've been able to do it, and I assure you that I'm absolutely no expert. All I've done is just watched other people and learnt. The sheath didn't mean I had to have many materials. It was just an off-cut bit of leather available from a leather merchant near me. And I just went through the process that I've learnt from so many of you good people on YouTube. So there we are once more. My knife and the sheath, and I couldn't be happier with that. So thank you very much again, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this journey of the knife and making the sheath with the dangler. I've really enjoyed it. I've made some real errors along the way, but I've shared them with you, and it's just one of those things, trial and error. Thanks again. I see the subscribers popping up a little bit. Keep going, tell your friends if possible. And today is January the 5th, and we were notified last night of a very severe lockdown. So I do wish you all well. I know lots of different parts of the world are in lockdown as well. Wish you all well. I know it's tough as hell. We've got the children at school now. We've got to homeschool them, so that's the end of a few projects for a little while. Can't get out, can't camp, but let's make the most of it. And I encourage you, if you've got any little projects in mind that you can do in the house, then just have a go. Brilliant. Thanks very much all, and I'll see you again.